ANM ThinkPod, an initiative by ANM Global.
A very warm welcome to another episode of ANM ThinkPod, an initiative by ANM Global. I'm Adarsh Himatsinghka, Principal Associate at ANM Global, and today I have a very special guest with me, Ms. Mrinalini Khanna, a professional with more than 20 plus years of experience. During her stint, she's worked with Endemol India as Head of Business Development, and from there on, led the originals vertical at Lionsgate India, and now, as an independent producer, is thriving. Welcome, Mrinalini.
Hi, Adarsh. Always a pleasure to collaborate with both Anushree and you.
Thank you so much, Mrinalini. To begin with, having donned multiple hats, being a writer, being a producer, and then obviously being at a studio, what are the key considerations or criterias that you look at when you're, selecting concepts or, forming the writer's room, or say, for example, by the end of it, greenlighting content? What are the key notes that you kind of have?
Well, I think all three of them are very different. I think when it comes to selecting concepts, it's really about intention. And whether it's a personal individual intention, whether it's attached to a brand that you represent, then the aim fundamentally is, how does this work for both of us?
Right.
How does a story idea do something for us, either as a studio or as a producer?
Right.
And similarly, what can we do for that story? And I think that synergy is so important. And I've always believed that it's really producers who in some way drive the ethos of an industry,
Absolutely.
especially the traditional producers, who used to pick an idea, support it, or pick a writer and support him or her.
Right.
And it really is about a marriage of intention. That do you feel it is the time for the story to be told? And how can you do that storytelling part to the best of your ability
Right.
as either a corporate or an individual?
Right.
And, it's like choosing a wardrobe to speak of your personality. Similarly, I think you end up curating projects which sort of establish you as a brand and what you want to stand for. When it comes to a writer's room, I think that's possibly one of the most complex things to put together,
Of course.
because it's not just about a person's ability with that particular story, but it's really about putting 3-4 different personalities in a room and hoping that they end up collaborating in a manner which is possibly the most honest and most vulnerable and the most fun that they can have.
Absolutely.
Right?
Right. Right.
And it becomes, in some ways, you're also doing like a behind-the-scenes psychological profile of the person,
Right.
while picking them based on what they've already done, what they want to do, their style of writing, how they react to the material you've given them.
Right. Right.
And then, of course, also seeing that when they come together, how do they add to that voice? What do
Absolutely.
they help amplify each other?
True.
Do they sort of allow each other to help get the best out? And also, a lot of times it's good to have one person who's really great at scene structure, but someone else who brings in character, and they just sort of camouflage each other's faults to some extent, and at the same time when they come together, it's like the perfect writer.
Exactly. So that synergy just sort of has to come in, and that reflects, when the content is finally out there as well.
Oh yes, I think I really believe anything on paper and anything on camera, they pick up on everything.
Yes.
They pick up on the energy in the room. They pick up
Yes.
on what you were feeling that day when the shot was taken. And that's just incredible. When it comes to greenlighting a project, I think I always have this internal joke. It's like it's karmic, literally, because a lot of things have to fall into place, right? And I think, as they say about babies, that, every baby is born with his or her own destiny. I think projects are with their own destiny. Sometimes you can have the most incredible project and it doesn't take off for a while. And then 3 years later, someone says, oh, I was looking for something in this space. Would you have anything? And then a part of you feels, okay, maybe the time has finally come for this project to come through.
Right.
But I think fundamentally, to greenlight something, it's a combination of commercial, logistic, and creative concerns.
Right.
And if all those concerns can get addressed in a manner that makes it work for everyone, then that's what makes a green light happen. Because I'm assuming the fact that you've already developed it and that you've gone out into the market to package it, or that you've put in a certain amount of grunt work to put it together, means you already want it to happen.
Right.
But I think the green light is just a serendipity of all things falling into place, which sometimes seems like an uphill task, and then sometimes things just happen on their own.
Yeah, they sort of come together in a
Yeah,
line.
and you'd love to take credit for it. But like I said, I think a lot of projects are just such a collective karma of people.
Yes.
You know, you were meant to work with someone, that person was meant to do this film or this series, and then it just falls into place.
I think that's the beauty about content, right? It's the blood, sweat, and tears of everybody just sort of coming, collaborating, synergizing, and then finally.
Absolutely, that's the beauty of what we do. That while you can always want to control things on paper,
right?
The magic that will happen and the chaos that will happen and all the bad things that can possibly go wrong will all happen. And that, I think your training as both producer and all other aspects is really to be prepared for that.
Right.
Because putting a project together is like hoping to control life. And you can't.
You can't.
Right?
Yeah.
Things will happen.
Right.
Second day, your lead actor might twist their ankle.
Right.
Fourth day, there was a massive traffic jam and your DOP couldn't come. Or whatever, small, big things, all that. But I think the collaboration of people is really what brings together so many wonderful things.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that collaboration actually includes even the lawyers.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think talking about lawyers brings me to my next question, Mrinalini. There's so many diverse aspects to being behind the screen as well, right? As I think, ranging from copyright aspects to contracts to commercial negotiations. What are your thoughts on the role of media lawyers and the kind of importance that they're driving now in this contemporary space?
Well, I think now they're probably driving far more because, the whole industry is becoming a lot more structured.
Right.
And I think now is also the time for so much collaboration.
Right.
Both as we've seen at the level of the platforms, as well as between producers.
Absolutely.
And in my mind, I think what lawyers do is fundamentally bring the glue that keeps something together.
Sure.
Right? I think I have always believed that the perfect marriage between a producer or a head of a studio or a creator is the yin and yang between him, her, and their legal head, right?
Right.
Because I think lawyers have to look at things with the perspective of what if it all goes bad?
Yes.
Right?
Right.
And at the same time, they also have to look at things in terms of protecting people.
Yes.
Because when you have a scenario where so many people are collaborating, it's the legal person's job to sort of draw the lines of, okay, whose purview is what.
Right.
And I think today, I would love to be in situations where I bring in the lawyer far earlier into a conversation.
Right.
So that between us, we understand what the intention is. And I think we are all at a stage where while we're keen to expand, the question with which you start a relationship should ideally be why not versus no, this can't happen.
Right.
And I think that you can only do when you and your legal team have a synergy where you trust each other, right?
Absolutely.
It's like going to a doctor and him telling you, no, don't do that.
Right.
A lot of times I've argued with my legal person, even when they've said, don't do that.
Right.
But it's always great to have that perspective on a situation.
100%.
And contracts are fundamentally meant to get two people to trust each other.
Right.
While keeping in mind that there might be a day where you don't want to see each other's face. So how can this sort of conscious uncoupling happen between you two, right?
Yes, yes.
That's a minefield.
Right.
And I think you can only do it when you and your legal team learn how to field for each other in that conversation.
Right.
And that's always a lot of fun, right? Because that's
Yes.
also a part of the negotiation that you're doing.
Absolutely.
But I think today the importance of lawyers has possibly increased because you're also having an impact on how to grow a business or how to
Yes.
grow an entity. And it's always good to, know exactly how they see the growth happen.
Right.
While you might be looking at it singularly from just a vision perspective, it's important to have someone else who looks at how to lay the bricks and build the actual structure.
Right, right. Because I think it's very important, and as a media lawyer, to just sort of facilitate the entire transaction, right? Facilitate the business so that it can see the light at the end
And
of
facilitate the relationship, because I
Right.
think that gets forgotten a lot of times when just the legal teams meet.
tunnel. Yes.
And there's, I think, a lot of things happen at two levels where it's a face-to-face between either heads of companies or individuals, and then the legal teams are in conversation. But I think as long as, to oversimplify, look at it as an arranged marriage where, two families are coming together and then discussing that, listen, this is what we want. I think the important thing is to arm your legal team maybe with that degree of, if not transparency, at least a certain amount of freedom
Yes.
to work around, because they also know who's sitting across them,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
And then just trust the fact that somewhere what you're hoping to achieve, both parties will see, but
Right.
you have to go that 12 rounds on certain points
Right,
and all
right.
that. But coming back to your original thing, I think lawyers have become very, very integral
Right.
to the concept of wanting to build any kind of identity as either a producer or a studio or a production house.
Right. Oh, that's really interesting, and to hear a perspective on how lawyers are seen from a business standpoint, right? Moving on, Mrinalini, just want to understand. You've been part of so many negotiations, so many contractual conversations, and all of that across your career. Just want to understand, what are the core pain points that you've seen negotiated and really pressed against.
So I won't answer that from purely a contractual point of view. I'd sort of answer that at maybe a slightly more zoomed out level.
Sure.
So, most of my contract negotiations have been on behalf of a very large company.
Right. Right.
And they've usually been with another individual
Right.
or then another production house. And while, of course, it's transactional, I think the challenge I've always felt is that the belief of two people necessarily, while they may not be same in stature in terms of what they represent,
Right.
but they are equal in terms of what they bring to the table. And
Right.
just to sort of explain that better is, when a writer comes on board and you as a studio have liked their story, I've often felt the belief is that, because as a studio you're paying the money, the contract has to sort of lean more towards what works for us,
Right.
right?
Right.
And not that I'm completely altruistic or idealistic, but I really believe that we work well when we begin to see everyone's contribution
Right.
as having a pivotal importance,
True.
right?
True.
Because the energy with which you view that person translate into the legalese on paper,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
And I think I've had a lot of debates with, the legal teams in these corporate structures about how aggressive certain contracts just sound.
Right. Right.
And it might just be the posturing of language. It may not be that
Yes.
you're necessarily wanting
Diluting
to...
the point for
exactly.
that matter.
But
right.
it's just the manner in which it's structured. It's
Yes.
intimidating.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that also goes further back to how we view individuals versus corporate structures.
Sure.
Because let's be honest, the putting together of a project is actually a culmination of a lot of individuals coming together
Absolutely.
under the umbrella of a corporate structure.
Yes.
And to me, that is my biggest pain point, that, we forget that while there might be money to spend, it's a person's idea that you're spending the money on, or it's a person's skill set
Right.
that you're spending that money on.
Right.
And I feel what that does is, initially when the euphoria of having, shaken hands with someone dies down, and then they react to just the first draft of the contract they've gotten, they're like, this is not what we discussed.
What we discussed, yeah.
Right?
The tonality of
Exactly.
things as well,
And then you as a producer have to bring in your legal person and say, no, just explain to him, this is what we discussed. It's just that the structure of the sentence is such.
Right.
And I know this is a very generic answer, but I've seen that go across even things like, how you want to structure payouts, IP, who owns it.
Yes.
And the classic question is, it was someone's idea, but I paid to make it bigger. So technically, and my question also is, this IP means nothing to either parties if you don't first enter this.
Right.
Right?
Right.
I think an all-time favorite is indemnifying each other.
Of course.
And so many, I think, there are classic clauses which I think come up in every contract.
Right.
But I also feel that all these pain points really get taken care of with the energy and the personality of the legal team and the producer.
Definitely.
I've worked with you closely.
Yeah.
And I've seen that, on a lot of contracts, while we had to explain certain clauses so many times, but I think the other side of the table understood where we were coming from only because we chose to be patient and discuss and take into account whatever made them comfortable where we could.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of times compromise is seen as a bad word. But I usually look at compromise as the only way to move forward.
100%. I totally agree
and
with that.
Compromise and collaboration are really the key to the future.
Absolutely.
Because with what we want to achieve, it's only going to be possible if more people come together.
Yeah, and see a situation where it's a win-win for both of us.
Absolutely.
Rather than, trying to fight for what you want. I think it's really important to take into consideration what the other person also wants on the other side. And then, like we spoke about, coming together in collaboration, right? It's really important to translate that on paper as well, not just words, right? So that's where I think lawyers also come into.
Also, I think, of course, the whole point of a contract is to make sure that you never regret having said or agreed to something. And there's always something to extricate you from a relationship that's no longer working for you.
Right.
But I also feel that we forget that if you truly analyze what you really need from this relationship, then there'll be a lot of points you'll be willing to give away to the other person.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that takes a lot of very honest conversations with your legal team.
True.
Does this really matter to me?
Absolutely.
What is the worst case scenario if I give this away? What will it do for me?
Right. And how deep of an impact and adversarial impact will it have on me?
Absolutely.
Right?
Because I think a lot of clauses end up becoming fundamentally points of ego.
Yes.
Right?
The moot points, as we call it.
Yeah. And then it's like, in a real world scenario, let's translate this and what does it do for me?
Yes.
And also, again, for a relationship to even go bad, it first has to start. Right? And I think maybe as a producer, you're just impatient, like, come on, let's just get over with this stage and get to pre-production.
Right.
But, the whole point of a lawyer is to make sure he or she is always in your head, making you think before the enthusiasm of saying yes overcomes you.
Right.
So that's fine.
No, that's really interesting. Again, Mrinalini, and it's incredible to see how media lawyers are also shaping up the business now, and how important their role has become. So thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. And also to move on to another question, Mrinalini, Just want to understand from you an overview of the overall content industry in terms of where it is now and what are the shifts over the years that we've seen.
So I think 2024 has been a bit of a watershed year, fundamentally because I think the hubris that was streaming has kind of collapsed on itself.
Right.
And it's unfortunate, but at the same time, I think there have been tremendous learnings for everyone. And hopefully, the big shift this year is going to be that with theatrical sort of holding ground, we should see a higher volume of film. But I think the debate really is, does anything 100 crores up really attract people to the theater? Is there a potential of something smaller, more prone to great storytelling, capable of drawing people back to the theaters?
Right.
But I think the more than a shift, the bigger gap that's there today for especially us producers is, where do we go if we have ideas which are not of a scale which sort of guarantee an impact, which is usually associated with big marketing budgets that are for big shows and big movies? And how can we convince platforms that there's the ability for diversity to draw greater audiences to both theaters as well as platforms? I think the challenge we're really facing is that lack of diversity, which we had seen from around 2000 till maybe even 2010,
Right.
has just kind of evaporated.
Yeah.
And now has sort of become a business model that first has to stand its own ground before being seen as its creative or conceptual impact on the industry.
Right. That's really interesting, and that's some key points to note there also in terms of how we want to move forward from here, right? I want to move on to talking about something. There's been conversation across the industry on that, right? It's something that relates to generative AI, right? It's a new topic. It's something that is penetrating the industry already, and there is so much buzz and so much conversation around it. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you see that coming up in the near future?
It is the future, right?
Right.
And I think the only way to sort of take it in your stride is to find ways and means of incorporating it in a manner where you feel you, I wouldn't say control it, but can work with it,
Sure.
right? And there are instances where AI will hopefully make our lives so much easier,
Right.
especially when you want to produce in a manner which is not very expensive and a little more in your control. And for you to achieve things which otherwise would take a lot of effort to be able to put together.
Right.
I think it's also meant to be and should be seen as a tool to make life easier,
Right.
especially in terms of processes.
Right.
But I think to me, what a lot of people would question is when you begin to depend on it from the perspective of, say, a predictive algorithm that is telling you trends that are likely to succeed versus trends which will not. And when it sort of borders onto taking charge of the creative process where human instinct gets diluted
Sure.
with the surety of
Success.
AI,
Yeah.
then that becomes, and I don't think it's just a philosophical debate. I think it's very important to take all these decisions keeping in mind that maybe the only way to go forward is a marriage between human instinct and technology.
Absolutely. Right.
Because the whole point of technology is meant to aid us,
Yes.
not the other way around.
Right.
I don't want to find out I'm living in the Matrix.
Yeah.
But for me, what's important is to hone that skill of
Right.
AI
Right.
in a matter where it amplifies the products of the human mind
Absolutely. Right.
versus diminishes our contribution.
Or the value of it.
Absolutely. I have friends who have set up AI studios which is only meant to take storytelling forward
Yes.
and allow you a certain amount of liberation from practices and processes of production which may not be something you want to get into, which I
Yeah.
think is fabulous.
Right.
Right? Anything that aids storytelling and anything that draws me into a world
Right.
which heightens my imagination or my interaction with that world.
And makes it more
phenomenal.
efficient as well in some
Absolutely.
ways, right?
That efficiency, that freedom, that cost control,
Yes.
all that is phenomenal to do.
Right. Right.
But if feedback or the judgment on an idea is going to come from that same space, then I'm not so sure if I'm that generous.
Right.
Because
right.
as
Absolutely.
producers, as creators, something needs to be said for our instinct,
Right.
right?
Right.
And I think that's a challenge all of us are going to have to deal with.
True. True.
Because, of course, it's kind of easy to understand how much more you'd be confident about an algorithm in some ways because it's quote unquote scientific.
True.
And how it takes so long for you to trust the instinct of an individual.
Right.
It takes years of successive work
Right.
for you to believe their instinct.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that human instinct is always right. But what I'm saying is that the moment you sort of are dependent on a predictive intelligence, then you also lose the chance to make mistakes.
Right.
And I think creative evolution is built on failure as much as success.
Absolutely. That's very well said.
No, but I'm sure a lot of people are saying, hey, well, you know, failure is also an X amount of money lost.
Right.
But that brings me back to my second point, that does everything that has to be made at a value which will give you sleepless nights if it doesn't work out?
Right. And there's always an opportunity cost.
I think there's always an opportunity cost to creating,
Yes.
right?
Right.
And I would say that would go if you were a car designer,
Yes.
or I'm sure there was an opportunity cost even to creating the Tesla series.
Yes.
I'm sure there's an opportunity cost to wanting to put together a particular football team.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's opportunity cost in everything.
In everything. Right.
And the important thing is, how do you mitigate that opportunity cost to a level without killing the possibility of creating something that could be different?
True. True. And also the conversation around originality, right? I think that also becomes key, because when you're relying on technology, I think you're somewhere, curbing originality.
100%. And I think the understanding of originality is also about your individual instinct, right?
True.
And I think what's interesting is, while this industry is based on very clearly individual vision, it is also based on corporates backing that individual vision.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And it's at its best a wonderful marriage. And if at its worst, it can curb that very vision that you came into the industry for.
True.
And I think that's where we have to come up with more creator-friendly versions of how we can work
With the technology.
with the technology, with our own instinct, in order to just keep the diversity of what's coming out alive.
Right.
And I'm very happy to be speaking to you on a weekend where, you've had something like a Black Warrant come out.
Yes.
And at the
absolutely.
same time, a Patal Lok.
Yes.
And both just showcase the phenomenal power of talent that exists in the country.
Absolutely.
Right? The ensemble in Black Warrant is just
Phenomenal.
exquisite.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And 𝗵𝗵H Mootwani is easily one of the best creators out there.
Right.
And he's given you a universe which I'm so happy to see brought to life.
Right.
Similarly, Patal Lok.
Right.
I think Sudeep Sharma is a national treasure. And Jaideep Alawat is just...
The
But
phenomenal
both
actors.
of these shows are examples, I think, more of somebody's instinct
Right.
backing an idea.
Right.
And then bringing people in to back that idea to a level where you do justice to it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, it was such a pleasure, on a personal note, it was such a pleasure to be representing Applause Entertainment. And,
Yeah.
as co-producers with Andolan. And, having seen both the teams work so closely on Black Warrant, right? It was
and it's wonderful because applause has always stood for adaptations.
Exactly.
And the fact that they've taken 2 books, the first I think Scam,
and
also, now this, and have just given it a life which is just phenomenal.
Right.
And to be, I get goosebumps the moment I think of a studio backing an idea to a level where it literally comes to life in front of your eyes.
And how, the audience is loving it so much, and
Absolutely.
the critics loving it so much. It's incredible to see the end product, from, where it started. And
Absolutely.
That actually takes me to my next question for you, Mrinalini. We've seen trends where original content was, at the helm of things. And now I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I see there's a recent shift in the trends where a lot of adaptations are coming forth, right? Be it in the form of book adaptations, remakes, or format rights for that matter. Where do you think that has sort of evolved, or where do you think that part of the industry is going on?
So this question I'll answer completely personally.
Sure.
Because at Endemol, my bread and butter was fundamentally formats.
Right.
And I totally understand the power of formats, especially in nonfiction. And, the company had some of the best creative minds from all over the world putting together show ideas which were just so audacious that it was just lovely to sort of see a trailer and say, wow, I wish we could do this here.
Absolutely.
I'm also a huge fan of the process of adaptation because it's not an easy process. I always consider it like surgery because you need to figure out what works for you in your market.
True.
And what has sort of socio-political relevance for you.
Right.
And what you need to then say, okay, this doesn't work for me, or we don't need this.
Yeah.
But at a personal level today, with the sheer power of streaming and the egalitarianism or the democracy of the subtitle, I think I would love for more books to be adapted.
Right.
But I think the beauty of something coming out from Korea or Israel or Turkey or Latin America is that today I can enjoy it in their original language.
Right. Right.
If I'm pressed for time, I'll watch it dubbed.
Right.
But to me, the beauty is really being able to enjoy something in the ethos that it was created in.
Absolutely.
I think book adaptations are wonderful because what they end up doing is starting this cycle of discovery. Where, you love something so much, then you want to go check out the book. And earlier there used to be this joke that, nothing was ever as good as the book.
Right. Still goes on, that joke.
But I think today there are many examples of things that sometimes even elevate what the book did.
Absolutely.
And my biggest example is always the Harry Potter series because while it was considered a children's book, at the height of its craze, which continues today, I'm sure the licensing values on Harry Potter is just phenomenal,
Right.
is that it always attracts everyone.
True.
Right?
True.
And I think that's the power of something that is written in such detail and depth.
Right.
And then you come on as a creator to take it onto another medium.
Right.
And then add to it what that medium offers, right?
Right.
But in terms of remakes, I think for the first time, it is so lovely to have us as a cohesive country.
Right.
Where, content is traveling in from all over the country, not to mention all over the world.
Right.
So does it make sense for me to remake something that's already been made? Not really. I could have understood it 15 years ago when the distances between where the original came from and where we were making it was so vast that you were actually doing an honor to the original by saying that, that story is so wonderful, let's make it here.
Right. And have it reached out to masses and to
absolutely.
Various,
and maybe even connect with a different audience altogether.
Exactly.
But today, one of my favorite things about streaming is that you're always aware of what's happening and what's being made all over the world.
Yes.
And I think the things that end up crossing over borders are, while they're hyper local, they have this incredible relatability.
Right.
And that actually is the sheer power of what we do.
Absolutely.
Is that someone watching your show in a totally unthought of part of the country has tears in their eyes, or is laughing, or is saying, "Oh my God, I do that with my mother."
Yes, that's the
And
power of storytelling, and
absolutely.
how it sort of reaches audiences and moves them in ways that, the original creation possibly didn't even imagine.
Absolutely.
So that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing those thoughts, Nalini. They're really interesting and so important to know. I think on a concluding note, I would love to get your thoughts in on where do you think we're going as an industry? What are the sort of reforms that you think need to come by for this industry to be thriving again and to be moving in a direction which is way more positive, way more audience friendly, and for so many businesses and minds to sort of come together and work as one?
Wow, that's a big question. I wouldn't call it reform.
Sure.
I think what we really need is we need to trust our producers more.
True.
But I think more importantly, I always get this feeling that we underestimate our audience.
Yeah.
That's a feeling I've always had. And yes, I can be accused of basically being a kid coming from a scenario like New Delhi and then Bombay. And English speaking schools. So yes, I totally admit to the fact that I don't really know too much of my own country. But I do think that the country is changing in this wonderful manner where people are consuming content from all over the world.
Right.
There is an awareness about what's happening in the world.
True.
And the country itself is changing.
Absolutely.
The gap between generations has widened.
So much.
But there are some things that will never change, and which is the power of a story that makes you laugh, cry, reach out to hold someone's hand in the
Absolutely.
dark, right?
Right.
And I think that only happens if we just maybe have a little more faith in what's being written and what's being thought of.
Yeah.
I just feel that over the past maybe 5 years, because there's just been so much stress, first with the pandemic, and then we're trying to recoup
Costs.
costs, that there's a lack of I wouldn't say freedom, but there's a lack of that feeling of let's try this.
Let's try something new.
Yeah.
The thought of experimenting with something new. You want to play on the safer cards rather than experiment with
And
something
others,
new.
there's a lot of talent out there, and it's not just in terms of writers and directors, but there's cinematographers, editors, composers. I mean, there is a generation of people who, while I grew up specifically on Star World and MTV, there's a generation of people out there who've grown up on world cinema and stuff coming from all over the world.
Right.
And I think if we can just keep allowing for a certain amount of newness, then the ripple effect of that is phenomenal.
Absolutely.
Because I get a little scared when I think of people saying only this kind of stuff will work, or now is the time of only this kind of film or this kind of cinema.
Right.
And in my tenure, both at Endemol and Lionsgate, I have met people with minds and talents and ideas, which is so exciting.
Right.
And I hope that we arrive at a place both commercially as well as emotionally as an industry,
Right.
where we are robust in our backing of ideas,
100%.
where we are fearless.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying fearless to the point of idiocy,
Yeah.
but I'm saying fearless to the point of backing the power of someone's vision.
True. True.
And hopefully that someone could be completely brand new.
Right.
But yeah, let's see.
Yeah,
I hope for that.
Yeah, 100%. As Steve Jobs also said, the crazy can change the world, right? So
Always. It's always the crazy.
Yeah. So thank you so much for that,
Not at
Nani.
all.
That brings us to the closing thoughts of the episode for today. And for me, I'll be walking out of this room way more informed, way more closer to the industry that I'm a part of. So thank you so much,
Thank
Mrinalini,
you
for
for
taking the
inviting me.
time out, and it was an absolute pleasure being in the same room as you and having this beautiful conversation. Thank you so much, Mrinalini, for joining in and having this wonderful conversation with us. And to our viewers, thank you so much for tuning in. It's been a pleasure, and hope to see you on another episode of ANM ThinkPod.
ANM ThinkPod, an initiative by ANM Global.